Just gonna check our agenda and see who's here and who we're waiting for. So we can give this a few more minutes because we're still missing quite a number of people.
I don't know why, but I was like so sure that our meeting with FIC was now and that this was later. So I was very shocked to click on my calendar to see this.
Oh, wow. No. It happens to me all the time. Don't worry. I get my meetings mixed up.
Hey, Alvin, how are you?
Pretty good. Just looking over the documents that have been sent over the past couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Did anyone say that they weren't able to come?
Helen told me she was going to be late. Bucky's just messaged me that she's unable to come. Oh, and Zaid also.
Okay.
Can't come. Yeah, so the only other person we would be expecting is Serena. And hopefully Serena will join in a few minutes. And Kayla, that's a good point. I didn't hear, I invited her to the meeting, but she was only kind of appointed group council oversight committee meeting, so I didn't actually get confirmation that she was coming. I'm not sure if anyone has like a contact for Kayla. I don't know if I have her on Facebook. Okay, Kayla can come. I just need to send her the meeting link. Apologies, everyone. We'll get started in a few minutes. Because we have a lot to talk about. I don't want to take up too much time.
Yeah, you know what?
What's that?
I was in Walmart. I seen a mouse when I was paying.
Oh, gross.
And I was like, I was at the self checkout, and I was like, it was like standing there, and like every, you know, when you go to the self checkout and it's like scan your items, and then bag your items,
Yeah.
and then go through every single process, type in your PIN, and it just felt like it was taking so long, and that mouse was just standing there, so it freaked me out.
Yikes. Yeah, no, that would freak me out. You saw how freaked out I got when we saw squirrels in the park the other day. Like, okay, so hi, Kayla. All right, it's nice to have you. I think we can get started now. So we're just waiting on Helen and Serena at this point. I've texted both of them to remind them, so hopefully they'll join soon. I'll call this the working group meeting to order now. It's 12:08 p.m. Okay, she's not coming. Okay. We'll start with a territorial acknowledgement before we get started. So we respectfully acknowledge that the SFSS is located on the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, which includes the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Coquitlam, and Katzie nations. And unceded means that these territories have never been handed over, sold, or given up by these nations, and that we are currently situated on occupied territories. And remembering that since we're all working from home and we're working from, whether it's from within BC, the country, or the world, that we're taking a moment to recognize and appreciate the lands that we're privileged to work on today. We will move into a roll call of attendance. I will just, let's do it. So just name, pronouns, and access needs. I'll start with myself. Hi, everyone. My name is Gabe Leosis. I'm the VP University Relations and lead on this working group in the bylaw review. My pronouns are he, him, his. My access needs are met. Asib?
Hi, everyone. My name is Asub. My pronouns are she and her, and all my access needs have been met.
Thank you, Asib. Corbett?
Hi, everyone. VP Finance. Pronouns are he, him, his, and all my access needs are met. Though, actually, no, my stomach's a little off, so I might cut out early if necessary. I'm also working on my laptop, which has no webcam, so.
Thank you, Corbett. Balkisa sent in regrets to me, so she will not be here, but we can move on to our VP Student Services.
Hi, my name is Matthew Provost, VP Student Services. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm just making some food right now, but I have my AirPods in so I can hear you.
Thank you, Matt. Faculty of Science rep. Wei-Chen.
Sorry, yeah, I was looking at my tab. My name is Wei-Chen, pronouns he, him, his. My access needs are met.
Thank you. Zaid sent in his regrets. Helen will be joining late. Alvin? Oh, he's getting his coffee. Oh, hi. Perfect timing.
I heard you guys. Hi, name is Alvin. I'm the engineering science counselor, and he, him, his. All my access needs are met.
Thank you. And Serena isn't coming. So lastly, we have Kayla.
Hi, I'm Kayla. Pronoun she, her, hers. All my access needs have been met.
Thank you, Kayla. And I'm really happy that you're here for the meeting today. And I recognize it's your first meeting and that it might be a bit overwhelming. Bylaw language speak can be very overwhelming at times. So please don't hesitate to ask any questions or points of clarification if there's anything that you are curious about. So we'll move to item number 4 then, adoption of the agenda. So I've put together sorry about that. Sarah, go ahead.
Yep, and I think Lawrence is here, but I don't know if there's any other staff. Sarah, she, her, and hers, and all my access needs have been met.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sarah. And we will move on then. I think Lawrence is not participating in the meeting, so that's okay. So the agenda has been circulated to all of you, and it's more just to add some structure to the meeting more than anything. This is a working group, so it's more informal, but is there any amendments or any additions to the agenda? Anything else that folks would like to talk about today? Give it a few seconds. All right, seeing none, we'll consider the agenda approved then. So we'll move into our new business then, our discussion points. And just as a reminder of the bylaw review project and kind of the timeline that we have, it's important to recognize the deadline we set for ourselves at the beginning of this project, which was September 18th. It's September 3rd now. That is 15 days away. It seems like a lot, but it's not. I think for the most part, we've made some pretty major decisions, and those major decisions have been translated into the draft bylaws that we're going to discuss today. We do still have some less major decisions to make after today, which I'm hoping will all be wrapped up before the deadline we've set for ourselves. I'm confident that we will finish and finish well by the deadline. And of course, between that deadline and October 1st, which I think is the date we're giving notice for our annual general meeting, we'll use that as kind of an opportunity to further develop a campaign and ways to mobilize students behind the bylaw changes we're proposing, and how us as board members and as counselors can spread the information and convince students to show up and to support the proposals we're putting forward. So is there any questions on the timeline before we move on? Also?
Yeah, I guess between now and the next 15 days, what specifically do we need? I know that we're going to go through and approve a lot of stuff today, but are there any major areas of review still needing to be done? Or just, I guess, as kind of the person who's been overlooking this project, do you think 15 days is enough time?
I think it's enough time, and at a very high level, what we have today is the bulk of the changes we wanted to make. I think some of the big areas that we were looking at, such as the powers of each governing body, how elections are going to work, those decisions to an extent have been solidified, and of course will be further solidified today. There are some smaller areas that need to be completed, such as just clarifying some definitions just in that first bylaw around certain things that just haven't been written yet. But there's also a small portion of another bylaw that needs to be fleshed out. But I think that we're in a very good spot and should be able to be completed by the deadline.
Cool. And for the deadline, I know between the deadline and when we have to put out the notice, does the deadline include some time to get some like consultation from a lawyer or whatever, just to make sure that everything is sound? I think that was part of the initial plan, was to, kind of do it on our own and then get maybe like a Societies Act lawyer or something to look it over with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that was the original intention of having that buffer before we actually started, before we put the special resolutions on the AGM agenda, is to get some legal advice. Yeah, thank you, Awesome. Is there any other questions? No? Okay, so I think we can go to 5.2, which is bylaw amendment batches. So there is a bit of an update here, and hopefully everyone has the briefing note. It's titled Revised Briefing Note, Special Resolution and Amendment Table. And this, I would, in that briefing note is a amendment table showing which bylaws are being amended and in which special resolution. I would recommend having this in front of you if you can, either printed or on your device, just because I think it's helpful to see that high level overview of the changes that are being made. And this table has been, I've gone in and kind of edited this as I've been amending the draft bylaws. So if there are any errors here that we come across today, we will change those. But I did want to go over some of the changes that have been made in terms of, well, firstly, you'll probably notice that in our discussions up until, in our discussions and meetings previous, we referred to 3 special resolutions being put to the membership. And on here, there is 4. And there's actually a reason for that. In discussion, going through the amendments, one thing that I thought of was that specifically when it comes to the new executive portfolios that we were proposing, that was included in the council empowerment special resolution. And so if that specific motion did not pass at the annual general meeting, we wouldn't have those new portfolios that we were proposing. So what I have done is I've taken that out of the council empowerment amendments and put it in its own special resolution. So if the council stuff doesn't pass, we still have an opportunity to present the new executive portfolios to the membership. But overall, looking at the amendment table, you can see where it says, yes, those are the amendments, the bylaws that are being amended by each respective special resolution. Some of them have different indications in each box. If you look under the column for special resolution 1, it says member versus member change. That probably means nothing to you. I'll explain what that means right now. It basically just means that in our bylaws, whenever it refers to our members, meaning as SFU students, SFSS members, I have simply gone in and taken the first letter of the word, the M, and capitalized it. Whenever you are referring to your membership, just to continue emphasizing the legitimacy and the power of the membership, it should always be capitalized. And that was actually recommended to previous and into the bylaw draft that I am presenting today. And then, of course, at the bottom, you can see a new bylaw is being created under this motion as well. And under special resolution 2 and 4, you'll see that, which is the executive officer the executive officer's bylaw, that it is being repealed and replaced because, of course, of the new portfolios. We're repealing the old bylaw and replacing it with the one with the new portfolios. Under special resolution 4, it says indirect amendment. And what it means by indirect amendment is because council is now becoming the legal board of directors, what needs to happen is that any mention of the board now needs to be changed to say council. And included in the special resolution, it'll say something along the lines of, be it resolved to replace all mentions of board or board of directors in the bylaws and replace it with council where necessary. And so by indirect amendment, I mean that kind of spot and replace that we're doing, if you want to think of it that way. Think of it as if you were in a Word document and you hit Control F and you typed in board and you wanted to replace all of those with council. That's what that means. It means we're not making any other changes other than changing board to council. Are there any questions specifically on the amendment table or the contents of this briefing note? Alvin?
Yeah, so I haven't had the chance to look at the proposed changes in detail, but in bylaw 7 through 9, you have changes in the different special resolutions, but then you also have repeals. Is that, can you explain more on that? Because repeals like removed, right?
Yeah, so under Special Resolution 3, the bylaw 9 that is being repealed is the one on faculty student unions. And the reason that one is being removed is because in our bylaws, there are two separate bylaws for department student unions and faculty student unions. What we're doing is basically combining it into one to make it more simpler. So we're amending bylaw 10, which is departmental student unions, to encapsulate both types of student unions, which is why bylaw 9, which is faculty student unions, is being repealed. And for the second one, bylaw 7 and 8, those bylaws are the ones pertaining to council. So bylaw 7 is council and bylaw 8 is powers, duties, and obligation of council. Those are being repealed because there's no purpose for them anymore, because the bylaws 5 and 6, which are the powers, duties, and obligations of the board, are being amended to be council as the legal board. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, is there any other questions? No. All right. So we can move on from that then. So 5.3 is around council and executive committee general elections. And this has been a big one that we've been trying to navigate and doing a lot of research on how other student societies do their executive committee and council elections for those student societies that do employ a model similar to the one that we're proposing. And something we've been trying to figure out is, we kind of knew that executive committee elections would run very similar to how our board elections work, and that they would be in the spring semester. There would be a nomination period, a campaigning period, and then a voting period to follow. And that would kind of be over 5 or 6 week period. The main point of discussion here has been around council elections and how standardized or destandardized elections should be, meaning how much central regulation of elections would be happening. Would or respective DSU and constituency group constitution and bylaws, or would it be more regulated by board regulations or the bylaws? What we determined from the conversations we had with our own graduate student society here at SFU and with the UBC AMS, their student society at UBC, their elections are very much destandardized in the sense that the elections don't all happen at one time. Councilors' start and end dates for their terms all happen at different times depending on when they were elected. All of them can be removed in different ways in accordance with their DSU and CG constitutions. So we figured that it would be trying to strike a balance between leaving flexibility for elections to be run the way student unions want them to be run, and having some basic level of standard central elections happening. So in the proposal that I sent to you all, the titled attachment proposal titled Council and Executive Committee General Elections. I have the wrong one open. Here it is. Is that executive committee and council elections would happen in the same semester on this general timeline. Executive committee elections would happen before reading break and before the council elections, with a nominating period in weeks 2 and 3 of the semester, campaigning period happening between weeks 4 and 5, and voting happening in week 6. Following voting period is generally a reading break. Reading break happens usually between weeks 6 and 7 of the semester. And what you'll see here is that council general elections would happen between weeks 7 and 10. But this is the important thing to recognize here, is that in this proposal, we've given student unions a month to hold their council elections, but they would be held in accordance with their own election rules laid out in their constitution and bylaws. So we've given them the flexibility to do elections the way that they want to do. Of course, subject to certain regulations laid out in elections policies passed by council. But at a high level, we've said, okay, this is the amount of time you need to have an election. Go ahead and have your election, but make sure you have someone elected by the end of week 10. So at a very high level, that is what this proposal would look like. I'll open it up to questions, and Sarah has a direct reply.
Hi, Gabe. I just have a question, actually, and I'm not sure if you would know this or if you spoke to them about it, but I think this model you're proposing sounds the best because it's potentially a little bit easier on a logistics side, and then also it is a little bit better on a board side, with council becoming like legally the board. I'm just wondering how other societies like AMS would register the new board every year, and then with changes with the BC registry, because it's possible to update that the entire year. It does cost money, obviously, so we wouldn't want to have to change it, every few days or something like that. But I don't know. I'm wondering what their model for that was.
So the two student societies that we spoke to with models similar to this were GSS and the SFSS. I asked the GSS a question around how they kind of do their board registration and like making sure you agree with the Societies Act and all of the fiduciary duties that come along with your role as a director of the society. I still want to do a follow-up on that because the answer I got wasn't quite clear. But in regard to, like elections or having to change the registry like every number of days, Osibin Corbett and I were on a call with the AMS president yesterday. And what he said was they don't generally have a problem with vacancies or by-elections because they have a solid system of alternates or proxy voting. So if a councillor seat becomes vacant or that councillor just doesn't attend a lot of meetings, they have up to 2 alternates that can come to council meetings and vote on behalf of that councillor. So in that way, it kind of prevents excessive by-elections and having to, file for a director change. Also as a direct reply.
Not really a reply, but if we're going to be following up with questions, now I'm kind of wondering, would that proxy have to be registered as well with the society's registry? I don't know.
Yeah, I guess if they're the legal board of directors, we do have to have whoever is technically filling that role registered. It's not a difficult change. extremely easy. It's all done online. It's really quick. But we would have to know about these changes, which right now it's a little bit trickier to know that, but it's not impossible for sure. So that's why I'm just curious what other societies are doing.
Yeah. Alvin, you have a direct reply first, and then Matt can go.
Yeah, so when you're talking about registering in the registry, in the new system, are you talking about the, per se, council members that you have to register, or the executive committee?
So councillors and members of the executive committee as voting members of council would all be directors of the society. So those directors would need to be registered with the government.
So if I could provide experience from my external organization with a similar model, we have a proxy system in place, just like you were mentioning with AMS, and I don't believe they changed the names of they don't put the proxy people on the registry as well. So I'll look more into that, but I think if we have a proxy system in place, that'll be easier in terms of registering people in the registry.
Yeah, I'd be interested to learn more about that if you're able to get some info. And I think we should follow up with AMS as well and see what their process is as well. Matt, you can go first, and then also.
Okay. Yeah, no, I was just looking at the deadline because I remember we were talking about this, and if it's like, I think maybe setting like hard deadlines, like if we have elections going, and then like Gabe said, give some leeway up until like week 10, but for like registry stuff, like making sure everything's done within 2 weeks, like for the registry, like if everything needs to be updated or things like that, making sure that there's like, I don't know, maybe that's done through like onboarding or something like that in that process that happens. And maybe that's when it happens, like the 2 weeks after council elections. And then we're able to kind of figure it out from there. I don't know if that would work, but that might be the easiest way, is just to set 2 weeks aside to get that information and like register the newly elected council members.
Also.
Yeah, I mean, I know that this is something we're going to follow up on, so it's not the most important thing ever, but if we're having elections, like the different DSUs, FSUs are having elections, what might save us time would be to make sure that people assign alternates at that time. So, of course, I'm assuming we would want them to be also reps from the same DSU or FSU. So we could just say, okay, you can have one proxy, and that person you need to let us know ASAP, and then we can just register the both of them.
Yeah.
If that's necessary, of course.
Yeah, we can definitely. That's definitely one way to do it. Corbett, you were up on the list a long time ago before we got a bunch of direct replies. You can go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, this is a new comment. So if I understand it, we're generally encouraging everyone to send elect councilors and select alternates near the end of the spring term. Just correct, right? Okay.
Yes.
So for all the student unions and groups that maybe do their elections semesterly or in the fall, are we going to require them all to change their constitutions to fit this particular, at least for this particular position? And if so, then we'll have to work with them to get that done sooner rather than later, because some might literally not be able to run their elections for these council positions until the fall, based on the current constitution, or when they have their AGMs, or however they update their constitution. Some might have never updated their constitution, because I remember from going to an ESSS AGM, that's usually when you do your constitutional changes, right? Once a year. Whereas Computing Science Student Society, they have a different process where it's like a 6-week process to update their constitution. So that will be a bit of we'll have to like loop Anna in, and there'll be its own project in a way to get everyone in line. Just a heads up for future work.
Yeah. One thing that I was thinking about as you were talking was it would be more work for the student union, but one route to go is that you could just have counselor elections happen at the required times, and the rest of their student union executive is elected whenever else in the year. They usually have them in accordance with their constitutions. I know that technically, I think that's even what's supposed to happen right now, is that counselors' term are supposed to be from May 1st, April 30th, but that doesn't always happen. So yeah, no, it is something to think about in terms of working with student unions to update their constitutions. That will be a big project that we'll need to take on after, if these bylaws are to pass. What's happening here in the chat? Yeah. Do folks have any more questions on this? Any follow-ups maybe on? Yeah, it is true that the bylaws would supersede any constitution of a student union. And typically student unions do, I think, we don't have any statistical data, this is kind of just from experience, but most student unions do have their elections in the spring. So I don't know how large of an impact or what student unions we would be impacting with this change. But I definitely don't kind of just want to go in and change the constitutions of student unions and then tell them later that we've made this change. So it would probably require some direct consultation. But Asip?
I do remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, the GSS talking about how some of their caucuses had people coming in on a rotating basis. I don't know if that's because maybe they do have their elections at other times, and also I'm assuming maybe in a similar way that the council does now, there might be a higher rate of turnover than there is for actual board members. So I guess I'm kind of just wondering aloud what it would be like. I guess what consequences would we have to deal with if, there were elections happening throughout the year and we had people coming in at different points in time? Because I think it's going to be unavoidable to some extent, but yeah.
Yeah. Corbett, you can respond.
Well, I guess Sarah said some additional filing fees, and so some extra paperwork on our end. And if we miss that, then theoretically a vote might not count. Or for say a person joins in the fall, and they're accepted by us. I'm assuming once their registration is a separate thing, but we'd have to just be clear that the process is all followed so that they're legitimate board members, right? So we wouldn't want a situation where board member somehow is not legitimate, but was still casting important votes and stuff, right? Yeah, exactly. And keeping track of quorum to a certain extent. As long as our quorum is fairly robust, has some flex to it, then we're probably okay. But yeah, it'll be a bit of a challenge, just like it is in council at the moment. The same thing, I think. And if we add additional quorum things like a certain minimum amount of execs have to be there, a certain minimum amount of councils in general, and that's I don't think that's a huge issue. Just
Yeah, I think it's just all about staying on top of tracking and making sure that if, vacancies are a common thing, that we have processes in place to deal with them quickly and swiftly. Yeah, are there does any other folks want to jump in? I guess I can ask, are we comfortable with this, the proposal as presented? Yeah, I'm seeing some nods. Okay, cool. I'll give it about I'll give you all 10 seconds or so to express any dissent or any other further questions you have. And if there aren't any, we can consider this proposal approved and integrated into the draft bylaws.
Oh, maybe this is part of another proposal. It was just something that just popped in my head. We have mentioned associate members in the bylaw 1 proposal, and that they can run for stuff. But I think in other areas it just talked about members. It doesn't mention associate members. So I wonder if that's going to be viewed as a confusion or not in the future. But if we have to be literally specific, say members and associate members can run for board, can run for council, can run for etc.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because I think all the changes that are happening with associate members are completely separate from all the council changes. Is that by chance? Yeah, I don't know. Do you have any suggestions on how to work around that?
Maybe terminology is a third terminology of membership is including members and associate members, and then if it makes sense in the sentence to say membership instead of members can run any. I don't know, but no, that probably will not necessarily help any. But I'll look at it. Maybe I'll have a better idea pop up.
Yeah. Maybe somewhere we can just add flexibility and say members and any other class of membership. I don't know, something to think about. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we can talk about that a little more too in a minute. Okay, so my question is, what are we doing now? Are we moving forward? I guess we can move forward in principle, but recognize that there's changes to be. Okay, cool. We can have a final draft. Sure. So if folks are comfortable, we can say we support this in principle today, but we'll bring a final draft for approval at our next working group meeting next week. Wonderful. Cool. Thanks, folks. And the next agenda item then, which is 5.4, also on the topic of elections, but more focused on executive committee vacancies, by-elections, and interim appointments to the executive committee. This is something we have talked about. I don't know if we've talked about it here, but we talked about it at governance committee, and the reason why it's brought up here today as a follow-up discussion. So I'll explain it to the best of my abilities here again. So we were trying to come up with a process in which if a vacancy occurred on the executive committee, when would it be allowable to have a by-election? In what situations can council use its power to appoint an acting executive officer to the executive committee? And when can by-elections happen? So in this proposal, it would allow 3 separate occasions within the academic year or fiscal year to have an election, once in the summer, once in the fall, and once in the spring, depending on when the vacancy occurs. So in the summer and fall, it would all happen roughly around the same timeline. There would be a nomination period, there would be a campaign period, and a voting period. And of course, depending on how many vacancies there are, that would dictate the number of by-elections that would occur. A vacancy, so let's say if a vacancy were to occur in the summer semester, a vacancy would have to occur, what did we change it to? 2 full weeks before the start of nomination period for that by-election to actually happen. If that vacancy occurs after the start of that 2 weeks, then the by-election would have to wait until the next by-election, which would be in this fall semester. We discussed it at governance committee, and there was we didn't give it final approval. There was discussion on the proposal. We changed some wording, and that's what's highlighted in green in the draft bylaw to encapsulate that clarification and wording. But I want to ask what folks think about this revised proposal, and if it encapsulates what we want to see. Calvin?
Yeah, reading the timeline of every semester, this is just my comment. I would say the nomination period seems a little bit too long if you want someone to fill the position as quickly as possible. But I'm sure you guys were talking about that. So I was wondering if you could elaborate more on the timeline you guys chose.
Mm-hmm. I think the general sentiment was a few reasons. One, to give time to actually prepare for the election, because the IEC needs, the Independent Electoral Commission would need some time to actually prepare the necessary, advertisements, documents, et cetera, for that by-election to actually occur. And 2, it gives enough time for people to actually consider running for that position. So if a vacancy to occur one day and then the by-election happens literally a week later, or 2 weeks later, it's time for people to ponder whether or not they actually want to run for the position. Those are kind of, if anyone else from governance committee remembers that discussion, but I think those were kind of 2 of the major reasons. Yeah.
Let me see here. Just one more comment. Yeah, that totally makes sense. It's just, I guess since you guys are on the board of directors right now, if you think you could hold out for, say, I think 10 weeks without someone in the position, and if you guys feel like that's comfortable enough, I agree with it. But then just my sentiment is to cut down the nomination period if the IEC allows for that,
Yeah, well, the position wouldn't be vacant either. The council would have the power to appoint interim or an acting executive officer in the meantime before the position gets officially filled by way of by-election. So the position wouldn't be vacant, and those duties and obligations of that executive officer wouldn't go uncompleted. So yeah, I don't know. Does that kind of, yeah. Cool. Matt?
Yeah, I think I also kind of remember this conversation, especially when we were talking about, you know, when if this ever were to happen, if there were any vacancies and council was given, council has the opportunity to put someone in that position to fill that vacancy. I wanted to make the recommendation that either the chair or vice chair step in to that role until it's filled, but then other folks on the committee were saying that, oh, well, it should be more of consensus based. So then all of council would elect a person to sit in that vacancy. But then there were other conversations coming around, well, we don't want to overwhelm folks on council because it is an executive role and our portfolios take on a lot. We sit on a lot of committees and things like that. So that was like one issue. And so I think the longer nominating period kind of gives that time to make the decision if they want to take up an exec role. And I feel like the execs that are elected would be able to take on some aspects, like maybe chairing a council meeting. But now there are also like vice chairs. So if that person is vacant and they're not chair, then there's also vice chairs and there's things to work around that. But I think that's a reason why is just because there needs to be a little bit more time for people to make that decision because they will be in that role for 10 weeks. And then they wouldn't have had the training. They're getting thrown right into the middle of when it would be happening. So there's just all those things to consider if they had the ability and capacity to take on that role. That's what I remember from that conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, for that recap. You have a better memory than I do. Helen, you're next on the list.
Yeah, so I guess I kind of want to talk more about what Matt was just explaining to all of us. See, this is a thing that I kind of want to avoid when looking at this situation is like throwing someone into the middle of all this work for a 10-week period and them not having any knowledge of what the governance structure is on the SFSS or, you know, what are the workings happening within the SFSS. And I feel like we need, as a working group right now, we need to make the decision in the next few weeks from which part of the SFSS do we want to bring in someone to fill a vacancy if that should happen? Do we want to bring in someone from council and have that idea of council electing someone or one of the leaders of council, like, you know, a vice chair or a chair of council? Or do we want someone already within the executive committee to take on another portfolio? Like, I don't know. I feel like we need to make that decision, but we have to do this in a way, I feel we have to do it in a way where we bring in someone to fill that vacancy from someone who has that knowledge already of what's going on in the SFSS. Because if we just, I don't know, if we open it up to the student body and then for someone to fill that vacancy for a 10-week period, yes, it's a good opportunity for them, but only for 10 weeks, you know? It just seems too fast that way. So that's just where I'm coming from at this point.
Yeah, so sorry, Matt, just before you go, I want to clarify. I think the proposal says that you can only appoint someone to the executive committee from within the membership of council. So it wouldn't just be some random student who might not be familiar with the SFSS governance structures at all. But Matt, you can go ahead.
Yeah, no, and like I took that into consideration. That makes sense, but just for like the sake of things, like you never know who would want to take up that position anyway, and that's why I feel like it's good to kind of delegate like in a form of consensus where everyone talks about it. And if there's like, you know, it could be the vice chair, it could be the chair, it could be another seat on council who wants to take up that role if they feel they have, you know. But I think that's the other thing too, is like, you know, with council being more involved, like I'm going to keep saying this, that there is going to be more of commitment. And so that means if council is going to be the overarching board, then they should be aware of the things that are happening and they should have to know like what is happening inside SFSS because they will be in that position and they're ultimately going to be making the bigger decisions and holding the executives accountable and whatnot. So they should be pretty much aware and kind of have an understanding what they will be getting into once they are elected as well. So I think that's just like a good point to kind of add on to that like you're not throwing anyone in there in the dark. Like if they're in that position, they should know that what they've been elected into, and also to do their due diligence to make sure they understand the interworkings of the society, because it is really complex. But as a new director on council, that's on their part as well.
Thank you, Matt. Asib?
Or I was just about to type remove me because I forgot. My bad. Sorry, I was thinking about Helen's question. I forgot.
And another thing to consider too is a major aspect of this model that we considered was encouraging counselors to take, actively work within the office of a specific executive officer. So I don't know, say I'm on council and I have a particular fascination for university relations. Then as a counselor, I would have the opportunity to work with the VP University Relations and within their office, so I could be more active in that portfolio. And that also gives an advantage, or it gives a certain, what that would mean is that there would be counselors present who would have knowledge of how that portfolio runs in the instance that they do choose to run or would like to be appointed as an acting officer in the event that there is a vacancy. Awesome, go ahead.
Yeah, so I remember this conversation came up a couple of times. So I was wondering, when there is an acting exec appointed by council, is there going to be some kind of understanding or stipulation that that person is not to abandon office to run for that position permanently? Kind of a twofold question, because at the same time, I think that if it's obviously possible and legal, that if someone is acting in a role, I think that they should not be able to run for that position and abandon their seat on council unless they completely withdraw from the society, like they abandon their seat on council and from the acting role, if that makes sense. So we don't end up having a situation where someone is kind of holding on to a council seat because they're technically still a councillor, even if they're acting in that position, and then run for that position. And then we didn't have a by-election for that council seat, and now we've got another vacancy just in a different place. So I know that came up a couple of years ago with the one of the VPs running for president because the president was gone, and then that position was vacant for the rest of the year. So is that even like something we can include? Like, how can we avoid that situation, I guess?
Yeah. Well, let's open up that discussion. What do folks think? Corbett?
Yeah, I know I've brought it up a few times, and I think in governance committee was because of that situation. Because the point of having these new policies and filling interim positions and by elections is ideally so we can make we can fill vacancies relatively easily, and we're not doing like back-to-back by elections or something like that. And so I'm more in favor of the person, if they're holding one position and they're running for another, in a by-election only, not the general election, that they would have to drop their current position to run, just so we can get all potential seats filled in one shot. Whether that works out in practice, like you would have to set some kind of like heads-up guideline, like you have they'd have to drop their seat in writing within, say, the nominating period before say end of week one of nominating period or something like that. I don't know if that works in practice though, because the idea is announcements and things like that, to have people know ahead of time if they want to run for council position or something.
Thank you, Corbett. Helen?
This may be a bad idea. I don't know. I'm just kind of going off the top of my head, but like, what if let's say a counselor, they ran in the by-election and then they got in to take up that vacancy in the executive committee. What if their student unions had already elected a counselor and then an alternate counselor? I don't know if that's a good idea or not. But if in the case that the counselor did go on and take on the portfolio for that 10-week period, then that alternate counselor would step in and take on their seat on council. Yeah, I don't know. It might be a bad idea. I'm just throwing that out there. Yeah.
Asif?
Honestly, I think it might be a cleaner fix if we just like have a stipulation that says if you're an acting member of the council and you run for a different position in the by-elections, you automatically like forfeited your seat. Same way, like when you miss 2 consecutive board meetings, you forfeited your seat on the board situation, if that's possible. And then that will spur that constituency to just have their by-election right away. They know that they have a vacancy, they can do it at the same time, and then you can have 2 new directors essentially come in. That might be easier. Because also I worry about like if you want to just like appoint someone from your department or faculty student union, that might not be as democratic as just holding an election. Because then, you know, it could be very well become a situation where you just cherry pick one of your friends or even like within the exec of the DSU, they just pick out one of their friends. That might not be that easy to work around.
Alvin?
Just a little tidbit of information. For ESSS, our DSU, we just aim to find a replacement or interim, or we let the president handle any vacancies.
Yeah, thank you. Helen?
I was just going to mention what Alvin was just saying there. First of all, I agree with what Asib was just saying right now. In terms of a democratic electoral process, that would be a lot better. Just in terms of the smaller student unions, you know, let's say, you know, what Dance is a smaller one. It was just created, their student union, not too long ago. You know, they may not have as many members on there. So I was just going to say, if let's say a counselor from Dance decided to run for the portfolio, and let's say they got in and there wasn't enough members to fill in that counselor position, then we have to consider what executive member within their student union takes on their counselor role. And I was just gonna say, maybe the president assumes that of their student union.
Sorry, Helen, I'm just trying to like.
Sorry. Okay. So
No, it's all good.
the smaller the student union, my fear, how do I put this and just be clear with you guys? My fear is that with a smaller student union or a newer student union, there may not be as many students willing to be a part of their student union. So if in the case, let's say the counselor that was a part of, let's just say Dance, the counselor that is from Dance decides to run in the by-election and gets the seat with that portfolio on the executive committee, who's going to have the seat for Dance? And what if there's not enough students in the Dance student union to take on that counselor's seat? So I was just saying, And just echoing what Alvin just said, let's have the president from that student union, Dance, as an example, assume the counselor's role. So they're taking on two positions, the president of their student union and the counselor of their student union. That's what I was just coming from. Because the bigger the student union is, the more easier it is to just fill in those seats. But I'm concerned for the smaller student unions. What are they going to do when that seat is gone, right? And they need to have someone represent their spot within the SFSS as a counselor. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense.
Awesome, you can reply.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, and I'm not I'm not explicitly for or against the idea. I just kind of like thinking out loud. But how would that differ from a vacancy in the general election? Because there are going to be there have been situations even on like the board of directors in which like a faculty just didn't put someone up, or no one ran, or whatever, for whatever position, and it just remained vacant. I guess like it to me, like the I guess the steps that I would see is that, you know, we did our due diligence by hosting a by-election. If the students within that department or faculty didn't fill the seat, then like it's kind of tough luck, I guess. But I do get the concern. So I mean, I'm not feeling any. I'm not for or against the idea of just appointing like somebody from it. But I just like to err on the side of have an election rather than appointment.
Yeah, and I mean, too, if someone on that executive of the dance student union was willing to stand up and be in that interim role, if such a role existed, then maybe they should also be considering running for that role as well. So Helen, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, obviously there is no, right now at least, there isn't a perfect fix because we are just trying to come up with ideas. But I will say that, because we are doing so many changes, we are restructuring the whole governance system that's in place for us right now. A part of it is going to be, like, the onus is going to be a lot on us too, to like, if, for instance, like if a faculty representative, the faculty, they didn't put up someone to go run for that election, you know, with this change being that it stems from us, you know, we have to also be the ones to keep pushing and keep putting in those reminders until the new structure, the new system is set in stone, right? So I don't know. I think we already know that, but I just wanted to put that out there for everyone, that it is still, a lot of the onus is going to be on us to keep pushing for this, even if it should be settled and should be elected on and it becomes our new system. It's still going to be on us to make sure that it is solidified, because once it's, you know, voted in, it doesn't mean it's going to stick. It could fall apart if we don't do our job.
Thank you, Helen. Alvin, you can go ahead.
In terms of the conversation we've been having, what are our thoughts on having a proxy if the position isn't filled? Because I would trust to give my proxy vote to MSE, mechatronics engineering, or anyone within applied sciences, for example. So what are our thoughts on a proxy vote if the position can't be filled, and if the president can't assume the role if we take that suggestion?
I mean, okay, for myself in practice, like the idea itself, I kind of like, in that like a student union would have an alternate or two alternates, and if that were to become vacant, the alternate would just take that seat until a by-election were to happen, or if it happens at all. I am just wondering how that would work in regard to the Societies Act and the official directors of the board. You know, like we're kind of, the line's a bit blurry right now. Do folks have any suggestions or Corbett?
Well, Alvin's suggestion isn't so much the alternates, but rather just like say ESSS just sends an email to council saying, "Hey, we're fine with MSESS voting on our behalf for the next while until we find a replacement." Is that the way I understand you, Alvin? Because currently our bylaws have no proxy voting allowed, and I think our amendments are the same thing. So because we're thinking maybe doing an alternate model instead, an alternate model that are coming from each department. I think GSS said, or is it AMS said that they allow anyone to be an alternate. It just has to be notified ahead of time. So yeah. So we can go out of that route as well, where it's the alternate doesn't necessarily have to be from the department. So I prefer it to be that just simply because of better representative chain, but like that could be like a final emergency level, like layers of failure where proxy voting is only allowed in certain circumstances, kind of thing, where like we have a vacancy, we can't that particular group cannot fill it for whatever reason or can't attend for whatever reason, and so as a final resort they can request a specific group to be a other sitting council member to be a proxy vote. You could do it that way.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. For myself, like I know there's a difference between proxy voting and alternate voting. I don't know. Personally, I feel a bit uncomfortable with the idea of proxy voting. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have much to say on that. The idea of having another counselor who doesn't represent the department that they're voting for kind of seems a bit to me. But Helen, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think just for the sake of everyone here, can we like just define the discrepancy like between, or the difference between proxy and alternate, just for everyone's clarity?
Awesome.
And this may not be right, this is just how I interpreted it, but like the alternate, I don't think we have that language necessarily in there right now, but I think, well, the proxy to me is somebody who would just come in and replace you at the board meeting when you're unable to attend for whatever reason. And we can like put a cap on however many meetings that they miss. But when we say alternate, are we talking about like the appointment of someone, like in the case that that person is like completely unable to attend, like ever, or is removed from the board, I guess. I don't know. So I guess that's my half answer / question / confusion.
I know Corbett knows the answer to this because we've talked about it before many times. So Corbett, do you want to go ahead and give it a shot?
Yeah, the way I interpret alternate voting is backup voters that are dedicated, that have been selected and approved ahead of time. And so if one person can't show, then they have a backup. And Senate operates this way. A lot of the students' positions have an alternate member as well as a backup in case I, on one committee, can't make it. They can come and they can vote. They're still involved in the committee. They still are on the mail list. They still get all the information. Everyone else is, so that they should theoretically, if they're doing their job, they are also kept up to date in case they need to jump in. Proxy voting, in a general sense, is one person voting on behalf of multiple others. It could be one other person, two other, three, whatever. It's used, I think, more regularly in for-profit corporations where you have shareholders and where you might have, say, a company. Like for instance, if Vancity is an investment manager for us, and they go to a shareholders meeting for a company that we invest in, them the Vancity will represent us and all the other people that invest under Vancity to that company for votes, and that might be 10 million shares, which might be 2% of the ownership or something like that. And so that's simpler to that, because obviously you're not going to have, if you've got literally hundreds of shares or shareholders, you can't have them all in the same room. So you usually use proxy voting where, people are represented. In our case, I think the general concern against proxy voting I've seen is mostly in the sense of factioning. If over time, if you use too much proxy voting, you could end up having, one less attendance for people to physically show up to the meetings and engage, and just say, "Oh, you just vote this way or vote that way." The other option is if the way I understand it too, like philosophically, is the proxy voter can just vote however they wish, and so that might actually be against the person that said, "Hey, vote on my behalf," because maybe they changed their mind after discussion or something. So there's a danger to that. Usually, the best idea from a democratic perspective is have your own voter there as much as possible. So as Alvin said there, you could put in though additional protections to restrict how many proxies you can have or how many people a proxy can represent to make it so that you don't have that potential collapse of attendance.
Alvin?
Yeah, and in terms of, in order to ease your discomfort in like giving someone else my vote, for example, I can say with confidence that applied sciences continuously collaborates with each other and they could represent our ideals. Another layer of protection could be, it has to be within the same faculty. But then again, it would, in terms of proxy voting, it would have to be approved by both parties. So there's a process there. So I still think it would be an appropriate way to fill out a vacancy in a sort of way for temporarily rather.
Helen, and then I kind of want to try and summarize the conversation a bit because we also do have a million other things to discuss. Helen, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. And see, that is where I think there's a danger. Like for applied sciences, Alvin, you mentioned that in applied sciences, you all have like collective votes. You all have kind of equal values because you guys collaborate continuously, right? So proxy voting, it works for you, absolutely. But Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, not so much from my experience. All our different student unions, yes, will collaborate every once in a while to do an event together, but we all have different constitutions. We all have different disciplines. We all have different visions on how we want to run our student unions. So proxy voting for arts and social sciences, it doesn't work from my experience. So what I'm proposing to everyone here is we need to decide on, do we want to keep in the phrasing of a proxy vote? Do we want to keep in the phrasing of an alternate vote? And we have to clearly define, like all of us have to make a cohesive decision on what does an alternate mean? What does a proxy vote mean? And do we keep one or the other? Do we keep both? And in what situations? We have to clearly make that definition that works for all student unions, not just between student unions in applied sciences and student unions in arts and social sciences. We have to create this in a way that's applicable to all. It's hard to do, like not every shoe fits every foot, but in this situation, I feel for us to have clarity between one another, we need to make that choice.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we kind of started off this conversation with Asab suggesting that if a counselor were to run for an executive committee position, that they should abandon their seat on council to do so. We talked about, okay, how does that vacancy get filled? Does it go seats abandoned, it's vacant, and then the DSU holds a by-election? Or does an alternate assume that seat until the by-election happens? Or is the seat abandoned and then their vote is given to another student union to exercise by proxy? And I hope I'm using that term right in the situation. Okay, cool. And of course, until a by-election would happen. Or the seat's abandoned and the president assumes that seat until it is filled. The president of the student union. And that, oh my God, and that is also not even taking into account like constituency groups who might not have structures as a student union. So I don't know, I saw like 4 different options there in what I was trying to summarize. I don't know which one we're down, but we should make some kind of decision. Corbett?
I recommend doing a quick, like people submit some proposals, like some really short summary, so we get this down on paper instead of just verbally, in case we're less confused. Because I've got a couple of days and I don't want us to keep going on and on about this because we need to get it to touch to other things. I think for the most part, we are like 90% there with everything else on the page. We just have to sort out the alternate versus proxy thing, right?
Okay, yeah.
Sarah, you had a direct response?
I just wanted to give a little bit of context. This isn't really making a suggestion one way or another, but there is a distinguishment between faculty and department. And the reason council is set up the way it is, I'm sure you've seen in the bylaws, there's this thing that makes it so that if it's faculty of education and I believe business, because those essentially only have like one department or one program, whereas something like science or engineering, there's several different departments, programs within that faculty. They're allowed to have more seats on council because of that distinction. So their faculty would have less of a representation. So there's also kind of room for something like that, to distinguish essentially between faculty and department, because they are different. And then if it is a department, potentially involving the faculty in some way as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so there are various options, and as Corbett was mentioning, maybe it is good to get it down on paper, and because this is a important but also small aspect in regard to all of the changes that are being made. So it is something we can come back to at a further meeting. I don't know who's going to take that on to make that briefing note or kind of write up those proposals. I mean, I can certainly help, but I feel like I've written so many briefing notes that Corbett?
I think each person had to submit their own, because I can't write for what Helen's idea is, right? Because I know Matt pitched an idea offline that I think might also handle some of these situations about certain size groups do appointment versus everyone else over a certain size. There's elections, kind of just the practicality of our environment. So we can do that and pitch them all in, and then hopefully have like a good discussion just on that and get something decided. So then that's finished. Okay, does that make sense? To just have a deadline, like, by next Thursday or something like that. Everything as we end, so we can make a decision or whatever works in the timeline. Like, it's got to be quick, right?
Yeah.
So,
does everyone agree with that?
And if everyone write up, then we can't accept it or something like that. Just be hard on ourselves.
Yeah. Okay, so if we're going down that route, which it looks like we are, I'm going to ask that all of you write something up and submit it to me by Tuesday in time for the next meeting on Thursday. So everyone has a chance to read all of them. Has a 1 day, 2 day period. I know it's tight, but we have a tight timeline. Okay, cool. I'm going to move on now, unless anyone has anything else to say, but I really want to move on. Okay, so I would like to go over each of the special resolutions, and we might not get to all of them, but I would like to start. So once again, just as a refresher, we are going to look at Special Resolution 1. And Special Resolution 1 is all around Societies Act compliance, simplifying our elections and referenda, adding some definitions. We added a new bylaw on what the processes are around dissolving the society if a need were ever to occur. And something that we haven't added yet, but hopefully will have added soon, is around a more expansive list of requirements for record keeping and archiving and access of those records and archives for the society. And so all the proposals that I sent out to you has a table of contents that show which respective bylaws are being amended. And for Special Resolution 1, most of them are really small changes. I think the biggest, smallest change, that makes no sense, it made more sense in my head, but one of the largest changes that, or most expansive, I suppose, is around membership, and simply just changing the word member from a lowercase m to a capital M. That really is most of the changes that are encapsulated in this package. And really, if I didn't include those, it probably would have been like 3 pages. The other big thing is adding a definition for what's called associate membership. And associate membership is defined as students who are enrolled in a college or institution that's affiliated with, or a college or institution that aren't undergraduates at SFU, but there's a contract or provision of services by the society that recognizes them as associate members. And that agreement would need to be ratified by the board or council. Some other, in terms of elections, we added definitions for 3 things: campaigning, pre-campaigning, endorsement, and slates. And those are coming out of IAC reports from many, many years asking for a clarification on those definitions. Nothing was changed in regard to the allowance of slates in the bylaws. It simply is just defined. Pre-campaigning, there is a line that's been added that simply says pre-campaigning is not allowed, and pre-campaigning is defined as campaigning before the start of campaign period. And some other small things like changing the, in some places it says Society Act, not Societies Act, plural, so that was changed. As well, there was certain sections that referred to specific portions of the Societies Act. For example, one part referred to Section 6 of the Societies Act. You should never be referring to specific portions of legislation and bylaws, because if that legislation changes, then it's a lot harder to than if you were to just refer to the legislation as a whole. And lastly, oh no, not lastly. One other change that was made in regard to general meetings was a bit of a flexibility around quorum. So the quorum for an annual general meeting would still be 250 members, and you would need 250 members to start the meeting. But if quorum were to fall below 250, then quorum would still be established, just to allow some flexibility. Unless it falls below a certain number. And I think in this proposal, we put 175. Just because sometimes people leaving the general meeting to block a certain vote from happening can be seen as political, or it can cause a lot of trouble. Let's just put it that way. And in regard to elections, it was mostly just cleaning up and making it look nicer. Some of the big changes included removing the ability of the IEC to impose fines of $100, because that is something that is not really enforceable, and something that even the last IEC in their IEC report said that they can't really escalate that high because they have no way of forcing candidates to pay $100. What we have put in there, though, is that they can impose a reduction in the amount they are reimbursed for their campaign expenses. I mentioned that pre-campaigning thing that I added in terms of it not being allowed. In regard to slates, it simply says that candidates and slates shall abide by the provisions in the bylaws and any policies that are passed by council. The only rule around slates that was added was that if slates were permissible by regulation, that slate names wouldn't appear on the society ballot. The amount of campaign expenses was increased from $50 to $100 that a candidate can spend on their campaign expenses. And added a clause for if an election were to be tied, how that is dealt with. And that would, I believe, result in a runoff election. Referenda, the threshold for amending bylaws via referenda was lowered from 3/4 to 2/3 to be consistent with the threshold that you can amend the bylaws at a general meeting. And I think I encapsulated all of it. Yeah. So are there any, like questions or concerns with Special Resolution 1 that anyone wants to bring up? I know, Sarah, you were mentioning something about the tie elections that might have been missed. Can you repeat that?
It wasn't that it was missing any information. I just thought using the language, having a runoff election could be beneficial, because I found when I read that section, I knew what you meant, but I think if I was a student that didn't know a lot about the SFS, which I'm sure a lot of the bylaws can be said the same, but if we're editing it, I think runoff election would make a little bit more sense, so students would know to expect an email or something of that nature.
Okay. I think that's a pretty small change we can make, and if folks are agreeable, I can make that amendment. Corbett, you can go first.
Yeah, I agree with Sarah. When I was originally reading that bylaw, I was thinking in terms of, is that implied that the tie breaking was set by either policy or by IEC regulation or IEC rules. And I was like, I don't necessarily want the idea of the IEC 1 year being able to say flip a coin to decide result versus another method. It should be consistent. And so I'm more in favor of runoff, because that's what we did the last time there was a tie. And so I think that would be better. What I actually wanted to talk about, though, was the records section. I'm sorry, you assigned me a chunk to work on, and I didn't. I completely forgot about it. What I wanted to include was some language around digital records, and that having that the SFS be able to digitally access records instead of expecting everyone to come in physically to the office to view it. Some records should probably be kept that way, like more confidential stuff. But I think things like our minutes, policies, a bunch of our records that we currently have on the website, I think we should actually more formalize that to say that we should have, the SFS should create and maintain some kind of digital archive that can be on-demand accessed, so that that it also incorporates a lot of our history and stuff. And that we should have a list of documents that would be publicly accessible that way, first members and anyone else. But yeah, yes. Currently it's in the policies, but on the bylaws. And so yeah, I would just like to have that moved up from the policies into a bylaw to be a little bit more structured. It doesn't have to be super extreme. It's just saying that there's a requirement for this kind of thing to exist. So that in future boards that maybe, or who knows, in the organization where maybe they are less transparent, they just don't have a choice. So that's my perspective. I can write something out quickly, or honestly, I can just look at the policies and see what it says there, and just see if that all makes sense to me. If there's anything missing or not, I can make a comment. But that would be probably a proposal popped up for next week or so.
Yeah, Corbett, is that something you might be able to have something prepared for next week?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll write that down. Wei Chen?
For the quorum, did you say 175 just now?
I did. It was meant to be 175. I recognize it says 125 in this proposal.
Yeah. So it's like I was confused.
Yeah. I haven't changed it yet. My apologies. It was meant to be 175. So thank you for pointing that out. And Alvin, you can go ahead. I'm just trying to type out that so I don't forget.
Just a quick question. In terms of slates, do you state that it's allowed or not allowed, or what decides that?
So all it says, okay, the first thing it says around slates is in the interpretations, and slates are simply just defined as a group of 2 or more candidates running in an election under a similar platform for mutual advantage with the goal of getting each other elected. Then in the actual elections bylaw, all it says around slates is this: candidates and slates shall abide by the provisions in these bylaws, regulations, and additional rules approved by the Independent Electoral Commission. And as a subpoint, it says whether or not slates are permissible by regulation, slates names shall not appear on the ballot of any society election. So it leaves flexibility for that to be decided by either a board or the IEC. Corbett?
Yeah, the way I interpret it is basically set by policy. And if it's not set by policy, then set by the IEC rules. My perspective on, and this was an issue I raised at the start of the last election, was that the bylaw that says that students, only members can campaign for or on behalf of a candidate, kind of implies that we can have slating by default, simply because all candidates are also members of the society. So a candidate should be able to campaign on behalf or for another candidate. And so that kind of fits into the idea of what a slate is generally, like the title of a slate or the shared colors of it. That's the marketing side of a slating. But the actual idea behind it is still just people, candidates coordinating and wanting to get and campaigning for each other effectively. And so we mostly want to have the clear definition of that, but not necessarily, like personally, I prefer it if it's actually more like, yes, slates are allowed or not allowed in bylaws, just to be clear and solid. But I understand that's a very controversial thing still. And so we kind of have to probably leave it up to policy for now. But I also, maybe we should put some language in where, like, if we already have language with IEC rules saying that, they can't make changes, or that they can make changes ahead of time, but like there's certain like a dead zone where they can't make any regulation changes to prevent like changing rules in the middle of an election. But do we want to have something along the same lines of policy, in the sense of like, if slates are allowed, people should be in the warning, right? Like, I don't know how to explain this very well. I just don't want a situation where people are coordinating and figuring out and like prepping and stuff, and suddenly, boom, right before the election happens, they find out they're not allowed to do that, right?
Yeah. Something I forgot to mention, and it's a good thing you asked that question, is that there is something in here that says, under the powers of the IEC, may make, amend, and repeal additional rules governing the conduct of elections or referenda that don't conflict with existing bylaw or regulations. That must be approved 4 weeks before the start of nomination period. So candidates would know at least 4 weeks in advance of the election if they are allowed to run as a slate or not. Matt?
I just had a question. So if we do decide to elect the independent electoral committee for the whole year, is there anything stating for the IEC to have their because if the thing is, the idea behind is that IEC will be in that position all year, so that means they'll be taking care of also executive elections and also council elections. So then if they are elected, shouldn't they have all of their regulations and rules submitted within like a certain time frame that they're elected? So that's going to be the regulations that they hold all year, so it's not a surprise to anyone. Does that make sense? Like is that something that, I don't know. So then they can't change it, right? Like if that's something that they set for the year, then they can't change that, or like, I don't know. That's just what I was thinking.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Matt, this Special Resolution 1 actually doesn't make that change of the IEC's term. It's Special Resolution 4. So if the council stuff weren't to pass, but this one does, the IEC wouldn't be a 13-month term. So I don't know if your question would still be applicable in that situation.
No, it wouldn't.
But it wouldn't, yeah.
Yeah, no, because the IC would be hired right before, ideally near the end of the previous term, or right before at the start of the previous term.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Corbett.
No, that's it. That's it.
Okay. In regard to well, yeah. I don't know. Do you have a follow-up question, Matt? Maybe. Do you want to? We can ask that maybe when we're on Resolution 4. Cool. Cool. Is there anyone on the list I'm forgetting? No. Okay. Do folks have any other questions? No. Oh, go ahead. Oh, sorry. Never mind. Cool. Are folks feeling comfortable with this resolution, and of course with the changes that are going to be made? Do we feel comfortable moving forward with this, and of course with the changes that I will go ahead and make, recommending this to the governance committee? Glorious. Okay, I'm going to take that as consensus then, that Special Resolution 1, as amended, will be recommended to the governance committee. We can move to Special Resolution 2 then, which is executive committee reform. And we've talked about this before, so I won't go into great detail about the specific portfolios because we should all know what those are. Actually, you know what? Kayla is new to the committee, so I'll give a very, very brief overview. Is that currently we have 6 executive officers. We have the president, the VP Student Services, the VP University Relations, the VP External, the VP Finance, and the VP Student Life to equal 6. In this new proposal, we would have 7 different portfolios, being the president, the VP Internal and Organizational Development, which is a new one, the VP between current VP Student Services and VP Finance, the VP University and Academic Affairs, which is virtually the same as the VP University Relations, just a different name, the VP External and Community Affairs, again, virtually the same as our current VP External Relations, different name, the VP Equity, what am I doing? The VP Equity and Sustainability, a new position, and the VP Events and Student Affairs. Virtually the same as the VP Student Life that's currently exists, different title. In terms of the new positions, the VP Internal and Organizational Development focuses more on the internal governing structures of the SFSS, so it would be more in charge of policy, bylaws, making sure that committees are functioning correctly, being in charge of all governing documents of the society, internal governing documents, does things like plan the annual general meeting. And the VP Internal is also kind of a deputy to the president, in terms of assisting the president in their duties, and also assuming the office of the president, should they vacate office, resign, impeached, any kind of vacating of office. And of course, this is all in relation to, you will see that I make references to the board here, and that's because if the council stuff doesn't pass, we will still have these new executive committee portfolios, regardless. Yeah. Do folks have any questions on this package? Corbett?
Yeah, a couple little things. There's a typo in, I think it's actually in 2 different positions, 2 and 4, where the exec committee bylaw the 7 execs, but it actually only says 6 in the little actual language of the composition. So that just needs to be fixed.
Oh yeah.
I wrote down that if we're give me a second to look up the bylaw again, but the proposal, but because I'm assuming these are going in order, like we put on bylaw, special resolution 1, special resolution 2, special resolution 3, all in that order.
Yeah.
We should probably then make sure that the bylaw 15 elections and special resolution appears the election stuff in resolution 1. So for instance, we still have information on 25 notices and stuff, and elections bylaws and stuff. And so, because my perspective is, if you're going to have 2 separate bylaws from 2 separate resolutions, and they're both being approved as amended as presented, is that I don't think it's slotted in. It's basically one overriding the other completely. Is the way I would interpret it. So I think we just have to be careful with that if we're going to do that.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm just wondering, what is the actual, if you're saying as presented, when I say as presented, I mean, I am amending this one line as I'm presenting it to you, but is that not the actual legal?
Well, that's what I'm not 100% sure, because the problem too is if you're amending that one line, it's just easier to say you want to amend that one line, saying that you want to add to this particular bylaw, like bylaw 15. Want to add I want to add a clause to bylaw 15 as presented would be more clear, I think. But to prevent that, because if I was going to say amend bylaw 1 as presented, and I was given this whole thing, I would assume the whole thing is being amended. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And
yeah,
so
that does make sense.
An issue with all the different definitions, because we're slotting in 1 or 2 definitions for each special resolution, and so they're not, it's not commutative. So we might want to, the motion side we might not actually clarify the language of saying if we're fully replacing and amending one bylaw, we should say that, and then if we're only amending sections of it, then we should specify those sections. It makes a much potentially longer list in some cases, but I think it'll prevent us from having a lot of confusion on which actual bylaw is full bylaw is the correct one if we end up overriding each other.
Yeah.
So a little bit more work on our end, but I think it's doable. It's just we just have to be more. I think we just have to assume one or two particular bylaws are the what we want to fully change it to, regardless, and then be really targeted for all the other small amendments to it.
Mm-hmm.
In other.
Oh, sorry, Corbett.
Oh yeah, go ahead. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm misinterpreting things, but I'd just like to know.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of give you the options that have been done, because there isn't necessarily a right way. There's a couple ways that it's been done in the past. So that's one of them, doing it bylaw by bylaw. When it's done that way, if it's not a full repeal and replacement of the bylaw, if any of those lines have changed, it'll usually be an insert. So it would just list, okay, these are the you know, if it's bylaw for A, these are the ones that have been changed, et cetera, et cetera. The other option that I've seen in the past, and these have passed, is by going by the theme. So, for example, members has been replaced a lot of times, not necessarily in this proposal, but the other ones. So that's something that you could do, but you'd have to individually mark out every place in the bylaws where that was. And then that goes to the other option of having a full repeal, like this whole bylaw is repealed and replaced with this, and then you just insert that entire bylaw. So I think it depends what the board ends up going with in terms of the proposals, but that might be a more understandable option for students if there are significant changes throughout. But there really isn't one way. It's just the easiest way to communicate these changes to students.
Okay, so Corbett asked, so if we don't say repeal and replace in the motion, it should be assumed it's just insertions across special resolutions. And that was a question.
Is that for me, Corbett?
Yeah, sorry, I was typing up when you were speaking. So.
Oh, sure. So what would be an example of it? What the wording otherwise?
Give me a second. I was thinking more, the prime example would be the interpretation section of the bylaws, because, or the interpretation definition, because we're doing that for every single special resolution.
Mm-hmm.
So give me a second to look it up. So in special resolution 2, we're just modifying executive officer to mean members of the executive committee as provided in bylaws, bylaw 4. And proposal 3, we still have the older definition of executive officer and interpretations. So like that was my concern. It was like, okay, if we do proposal 2, vote it through, and that changes executive officer, and then we do proposal 3, and it proves it. Does that roll back the executive officer definitions? That was what I was concerned about, because it was done in specific. But
yeah.
But if it's not, if we can, yeah. I was just wondering if we need to like specify in the motion a little bit more, be more, a little more careful, saying that we're adding these 2 definitions to the interpretations as presented, or something like that. Would be simpler and easier.
Yeah, I think like the way that I would recommend, if you're not just going with a simple, for example, often what will happen is they'll repeal a bunch of different bylaws and they'll list those specifically and say like existing bylaws blank 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 be repealed and replaced with the bylaws attached. So that's one way. If you're going a little bit more line by line, I would repeal the entire line. I wouldn't try to add things in. I think that would be also just really hard to type out and to take a lot of time.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, I don't think we have the time to do that. So
No.
I think like a whole repeal and replace is probably just the most timely option at this point. But you'd want to do it like repealing a whole line rather than trying to insert a specific into an existing one. Yeah, it's just too complicated.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So in this particular case, we can, because there are only 3 different, I don't even know what's happening. I have so many pieces of paper on my desk. I think there's only 3 different bylaws that are being amended under Proposal 2, and the first one and the third one only have one line within that bylaw that are being amended, so we can change the wording of the actual special resolution to make it easier for yeah. But circling, back to the proposal as a whole, are we comfortable with this? Yeah. Yeah, and we've talked about it before too, so I think we all feel pretty comfortable. Yes, sir. Thank you, Wasip. So we'll consider, where's my agenda? We'll consider this one approved. And of course, the special resolution will be given some more detail. So we have 2 minutes, so I'm not going to try and force through the other 2 special resolutions. So maybe we can wait to do that one. I do, however, want to ask, initially, so I've scheduled the next meeting for a week today at the same time. I initially wanted to meet on Tuesday. Actually, you know what? Never mind. That won't work because I've already asked you guys to give me something for Tuesday for the Thursday meeting. Okay, never mind. Forget what I was just about to say. We'll postpone agenda items 5.6 and 7 for the next meeting. Pardon me, 0.7 and 0.8. And we'll meet again next week. And I think we can adjourn the meeting then at 1:59. Thanks, folks. This was really productive.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.